I'm Tammy Dunnett, ex-target workplace bully turned communication coach. But it wasn't that long ago when I lacked the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to ditch the drama, confidently handle difficult conversations, and create better relationships. Fast forward past many failed attempts and lessons learned, and you will see the business that I have today. One that is helping others just like you to find the confidence and peace knowing you can change your circumstances one conversation at a time. I created the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit to give you access to industry leaders who are sharing simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can do the same. If you are an employee, supervisor, or an employer and you are looking to access the top strategies to successfully dissolve conflict without damaging your relationships, then you, my friend, are in the right place. Today, I'd love to introduce you to Bonnie Artman Fox. She is a workplace conflict expert, and she believes that the magic happens when people have the courage to talk about what's really going on in the workplace. Drawing from decades of experience as a psychiatric nurse and a licensed family therapist, Bonnie works with executive leaders and team managers who want to stop divisive behaviors, resolve conflict, and build the team trust that is needed to create healthy work cultures that drive results. Bonnie is an accredited leadership coach and professional speaker who's known for helping leaders bring teams together so they can get more done. And she's also the author of the best-selling book, How Did My Family Get in the Office? In My Office. So we're going to be talking about that today. Welcome, Bonnie.
Hello, Tammy. Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you.
It's always nice to talk to someone else who has similar viewpoints and has a real appreciation for the interpersonal dynamics. And I love that we're going to talk about the family and how that's really present in all of our conversations today.
Yes, it absolutely is. And whether we like it or not, our family upbringing is an extension into all aspects of our lives, including at work, and especially with how conflict was handled in our upbringing.
hmm So, why is that so important? I mean, we all know that we learn things from our family, from our friends, and there's no real official training grounds for conflict resolution. But why is it so important to look at family upbringing as it relates to conflict?
Yes. Well, as you said, what was modeled to us growing up is leaves an imprint on us. And they're often conscious or unconscious imprints that tell us, how do we get along with others? How do we work through differences? How do we resolve conflict? How do we communicate? What's okay to talk about? What's not okay to talk about? And we internalize that. And we then develop our own conflict style as a result of what's modeled to us. Now, there's a lot of other factors involved with that, from the birth order and other siblings in the family, any trauma, struggles in our upbringing. There's a lot of things that impact how we deal with conflict. But we know that usually by age 6, kids have decided how they're going to deal with life when things get tough. And it's fascinating that that tends to be the pattern that we take with us into the rest of our lives, into adulthood.
That is fascinating. Age 6, that is really quite young.
Mhm.
And I can see that we're definitely quite impressionable. We just soak up everything when we are younger. And as you were talking about some of those factors, I immediately resonated with birth order because I am the second out of 5. I have an older brother, but I definitely have memories of thinking I had to be the leader and do the things that I thought he was supposed to do. And that really influenced how I was with my siblings. I couldn't be the second sibling. I had to be the leader sibling.
Well, and you were the firstborn female
Mhm.
also in the family. So that could play an influence on the role that you had in your family. It can also make a difference of what is the age difference between you and your older brother and your other siblings. Also, what was going on in the family at the time, that maybe stressors that you dealt with, that you felt that you needed to take that lead. So there's a lot of different considerations in birth order.
Yeah, I definitely am drawing the connection to that leadership. Like I've always been that leader, the protective person. And I can see the relationship to my own situation when I was trying to navigate the bully in the workplace because of that upbringing. So fascinating. I'm going to have to think about that even more.
Mhm.
But you talk about this thing called a workplace family factor. What is that?
Yes. So in my book, How Did My Family Get in My Office? I interviewed 11 real life leaders about how conflict was handled in their upbringing and how it impacted the way they deal with conflict in the workplace as a leader. And I was so honored. These leaders were so transparent and vulnerable about what really happened growing up that left an imprint on them.
Mhm.
And as I looked at the pattern of all of their stories, I recognized that there is what I call the family factor. And it's how I define it is the connection between how conflict was handled in our upbringing impacts how we deal with conflict as adults, and in particular in the workplace. So that's what I define as the workplace family factor.
Did you find that, so this is interesting to me because I think of how people witness something and they can either go and align with it, or they go, that's not for me and I'm going to be hard left over here and do something else. Did you find most of your leaders were in alignment or chose a different pathway?
Many of them chose, it was a way of probably unconsciously of dealing with the stressors in the family. For example, I think of one of the leaders, her name was June. By the way, they're all very real stories that they chose their fictitious name. This was June, and she grew up in an alcoholic family. And her father was an alcoholic, and in her words, her mom pretended it wasn't happening. It wasn't unusual for the police to come to the house on one night for a drug raid because her brothers were selling drugs. There'd be yelling, screaming, fighting. And the next day, it was as if nothing had ever happened.
Mm.
What June, her role in the family was to be the protector, to stand up to her father regarding his drinking because her mother wasn't doing it. And it came at a cost for her that she was physically abused, and there was a lot of emotional abuse for her also growing up. So it was because of the events in the family growing up that impacted. She had to be on self-protection, not only for herself, but trying to protect other family members. Well, fast forward then into her adult life and as a leader, one day she happened to read an article about adult children of alcoholics, and she was intrigued by this. So she made an appointment with the company's EAP department, began speaking to the counselor about this article, and she then recognized that she had become an alcoholic. Unbeknownst to her, that she thought it was normal to the drinking to the point of a blackout every night, and then being able to be fully functioning the next day at work. As she got into recovery, got into therapy, and started looking at the role of alcohol in her life, it was really her way of numbing the pain from all of the emotional and physical abuse from her upbringing. What's really fascinating about June's story is she gained this self-awareness. She was working on herself and how her family upbringing impacted her at work. And she was up for a promotion. Her boss came to her and said, "We value you. You bring great value to the company. However, you still have some rough edges. And we'd like you to go to this leadership development program to develop some of your emotional intelligence skills." So June goes to this program, and she was so funny during the interview for the book. She said, "You know, Bonnie, there are people, leaders there like me, who needed to learn how to tone down. And then there were other leaders who needed to learn how to speak up." At one point during this program, the facilitator asked June, "Tell me about your upbringing." And June told her, and the facilitator said, "You can stop running now. You're
Wow.
okay. You're safe." And that was June's turnaround, of turning around those rather abrasive, overly aggressive behaviors that had been her way of protecting herself all those years ago. Unknowingly, they were still showing up in her life, in her work life in particular, that almost got in the way of her getting a promotion.
Mhm.
even after years of recovery. But because she was so committed to working on herself and gaining self-awareness and improving how she responded during conflict, that she was able to turn around those behaviors and became a very empathic, inspiring leader that employees loved to work for from that point forward. So
That's
that's just one example of how gaining the awareness of your family factor can impact you at work and what you can do about it.
that is an amazing story. And at first I was like, yep, alcoholic father, yep, mother who avoided it. And I was that protector, as I shared earlier.
Yeah.
So I resonated with some of it, but definitely not to the depths that she had experienced it. And hearing that message, you can stop running. And now I almost started to like tear up because I thought, wow, like that. I hope our listeners that is an aha moment for them as they listen to you share that story, June's story, and her experience of that self-awareness and that awakening, and then how she was able to rebirth herself and really align with who she wanted to be.
Absolutely. That was the beauty of what I saw in all of the leaders that I interviewed, that they recognized their family factor and then they made the conscious choice. My past doesn't define me. Who do I aspire to be?
Mhm.
And that's what motivated them to change their conflict pattern for the better. And their stories are so inspiring because they show that change is possible through self-awareness.
Mhm. Yeah, so empowering. And I want to just build a little bit more just for our listeners to really understand, because that was part of the journey I went through when I was on my recovery of being a target of workplace bully. Is I had to ask myself, what am I bringing to this relationship? What am
Yes.
I bringing to this conflict that I could change? And what
Mhm.
I realized is that protector role in me was taking on the stories of everybody else who was also struggling, and it fed me. It made me feel bigger, it made me feel angrier, it made me be louder, and I had to release, I had to let go of their pain and let them take that journey and only focus on my pain and to work on my relationship with that person. So I just wanted to share that because I think for our listeners, those who do have that pain and have that kind of protective tendency
Mhm.
might find that they're doing the same thing. I've talked to many people who that's part of what fuels them to be
Yes.
right in the workplace is, well, this person also has a problem and this person is struggling. Those are individual relationships, and we just have to let them journey through their relationship and guide them as best we can, but not take it on.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I really emphasize in the book that what all the leaders did well is they look back at their upbringing to understand the patterns, not to blame, shame, or finger point. They
Mhm.
they truly had the mindset of, I believe my parents or whoever raised them did the best they could with what they knew at the time. And they took on a growth mindset of taking personal responsibility for themselves and what was their opportunity for growth. What can I do different here to change my own pattern, again, to show up to be who I aspire to be.
So powerful. I can't wait to see the aha moments that pop up in our Facebook group after this interview is released. Okay, there's something else you talk about in your book that I want to touch on it. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to say this right because it's a blend of two words and I do that too, but pertinacity, is that, am I saying it right?
Pertinacity, yes, yes.
Perfect. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how that's relevant to conflict.
Well, again, as I was looking at all of the leaders that I had interviewed in the book, I was looking for a theme. And what I found was they all were committed to changing the pattern. And I came upon this word, pertinacity, in the dictionary. It's a real word.
Oh, it is.
It is. It is. It's
Okay.
the combination of persistence and tenacity. And the definition is sticking with what's difficult.
Oh,
And
I love
uh,
it.
yes, and I thought that's exactly what these leaders did. They learned how to stick with difficult conversations. And the qualities of pertinacity, again, that are listed in Webster's are courage, conviction, and a little bit of stubbornness. I love that part. And when I look at them, again, at the leaders who I interviewed, they had the courage to have self-awareness, to look at their part instead of finger pointing and and blaming everyone else. They looked at themselves. They also had a conviction that my past, what was modeled to me, or even who I've become, isn't who I want to be. And there was this inner resolve to change for the better, to improve their conflict style. And then a little bit of stubbornness was, I'm going to be committed to this no matter how hard it is. And I loved what they modeled to us, because it's so easy when we are in difficult conversations, when we are in conflict, to avoid and, again, either defend or point the finger. It's everybody else's problem. We don't have a problem. And then we bow out of the conversation, or things escalate. And that's when we say something we later regret, or there's name calling, or whatever ugliness comes out. And then the conflict doesn't get resolved. Mm-hmm. And what pertinacity is, of how I apply it in the book, is learning to stick with those difficult conversations. And how do we do that? By staying calm and grounded, and being able to truly listen, to understand, where is this other person coming from? What's important to them? And having a curiosity, so that we really get to the root of what the conflict is about. And that's what I found so inspiring. So that's what pertinacity is.
Here, I thought you'd made up that word, because I do that all the time. My mind is too fast and my mouth is too slow, so they come out blended.
No, got to give Webster credit.
I do love that word. I think it speaks so into the spirit of somebody who is looking to make a change, and maybe they don't even know what they need to do yet. And that is my hope with this conversation and every other conversation I've had, is that people will tap into someone who is resonating with them, and put them into this forward movement, so that they can change their circumstances and actually create a better relationship. Even if the other person doesn't change, it is possible that you can show up differently and create a different dynamic.
I love that you say that, Tammy. That is so true, that when we show up differently, when we are taking responsibility for our part, when we are less reactive, other people pick up on that. And it's the saying is, who are you and what did you do with Bonnie?
My husband said that to me.
Something is different here. And it allows the other person to shift, to show up differently. Now, granted, sometimes other people don't like that, and they try to push our buttons to get us to respond to the way that they're used to us being, in terms of reactive, and our amygdala running the show and shutting down our prefrontal cortex that shuts down our best thinking. And that's when we tend to be reactive. When we're showing up as our best and changing that pattern, then we are creating that different dynamic. And that's when that's exciting. That's when there's new possibilities of how a conversation can move forward, and ultimately a conflict get resolved.
Mm-hmm. I like what you shared there about when we show up differently and people may not like it or feel comfortable in it, that they will try to bring us backwards into the place that we used to be. And that's just about them feeling comfortable with the known. Like there's that change versus stability. That's someone who likes stability and can predict how you're going to behave.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you think, and this is a strategy I use, but I'm not sure if it's one that you teach with your leaders, but just kind of prefacing that I'm going to try something different before I show up. Like say, listen, guys, I know that in the past I've been XYZ. This is the person I want you to see me as a confident, capable, vulnerable leader. And that's why you're going to see these changes in me. Kind of like set the stage so they don't feel so jarred.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And knowing that it's also holding ourselves accountable. Yeah. That it's saying, okay, this is my intent to be. I'm not looking to you to take care of me, or I'm saying this because I'm setting the intention of who I want to be. And I recognize there have been times in the past, this isn't who I was. And it is my intent to do better. I think that does level the playing ground and allows employees to see their leaders as people, and builds vulnerability-based trust.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important too, just to, like I was talking to someone the other day and they were kind of giving up because they're like, I've been trying and trying and trying for a few days and not getting the results, but they hadn't set the stage. And they were going through that exact same thing where their colleagues were like, this isn't you. What's going on with you today? What's wrong with you today? They didn't understand what she was trying to achieve.
Yeah. And it does take time. It really does. Even when we show up differently, it's so easy to focus on they're not changing with us, and other people are on their own timetable. And how can we stay in relationship with them and still show up as our best, who we intend and aspire to be, and extend the hand to that person and accept them for where they are. Now, that doesn't mean we don't set boundaries and set limits and all that. It's not reacting
Mhm.
when they're not responding in kind or the way that we would want them to.
I suspect this makes me feel like you brought up the June story earlier with the alcohol. And I think about the steps that they go through when they recover and how they have to make amends. And then sometimes they need to remove themselves from an environment that keeps them going back.
Mhm.
I could almost vision that these leaders who are recognizing this and want to make a change, sometimes they may need to leave the department to do so in order to have that freedom and that blank slate to start again without feeling like you're always being judged or kind of like being pulled back into old behaviors.
That may be for some people, and everybody has to make that decision of what is best for them. When is enough enough? One of the other stories in the book is Grace's story. And interestingly, also her father was an alcoholic. Not every story was with an addiction or alcoholism background. Uh, Grace's story also had that in her background. Her father was the alcoholic, but he was a very low key alcoholic. He wasn't abrasive or yelling.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite was her mother tended to be overly emotional and unpredictable in her moods. There was not alcohol involved with her mother. So with this dynamic growing up, she found herself not wanting to spend much time at home. And because she was always triggered with this overreactivity of her mom. Gratefully, she had a grandmother in her life who became a positive, calming presence to her and very influential to her. Well, fast forward into her adult life, into Grace's adult life, when she was in a leadership position, she found that she would get triggered emotionally, and she called them emotional hooks, when her employees or coworkers would not take responsibility for their behavior or have these overreactions to situations. And as she pondered it, she realized, again through self-awareness, my mother is in my office. That's what was triggering Grace. And what she chose to do, she was very intentional about learning how to set boundaries with her mother. And so much so, a situation arose where her mother required surgery, and Grace and her husband invited her mother to come and stay with them during her recovery period. She went into that fully knowing, I've got to learn how to set boundaries here. I want to learn, this was Grace's speaking, I want to learn how to be in relationship with my mother, knowing one day she's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know I did everything I could to be in relationship with her and not allow myself to get pulled into those emotional hooks. And she did it by setting boundaries. And she said, Bonnie, there were times where we would fall into the same old dance. And that's when that was Grace's reminder. Okay, that's the old dance. I want to change the pattern. This isn't who I aspire to be. And she then improved the relationship with her mother. What was so fascinating about her story is then she applied those same awarenesses and boundaries into the workplace. And as she recognized that she improved how she didn't get pulled in with the emotional triggers with her mother, she no longer, or at least limited, getting pulled in with employees and allowed natural consequences with employees. So that's the beauty of, and it's hard work, and again, it takes pertinacity for us to do that internal work, there are positive ripple effects of how this can affect other aspects of our lives. That we can, how do we learn how to stay in a relationship with people who are difficult while still taking care of ourselves and doing that through boundaries?
That is so beautifully inspiring. Just to hear those revelations that your research participants were having and that you got to be a witness to and to share their stories now going forward, the ripple effect is massive.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
for those who are listening and they're starting to go, I'm wondering if my family dynamics are in my workplace, what is a practical tip that they can use to address conflict productively?
Well, and this comes from one of my stories, an example of something in my own life. And I call it the get your own Kleenex example. And similar to you, Tammy, I was in a work situation many years ago in my 20s when I had been recruited for my first leadership position and had been promised leadership development and all this grooming, and none of it happened. And I was very clear with them from the get-go. I've not been a leader before. I don't know if I'm the person for you. And they assured me, oh, Bonnie, you're known for your great clinical skills. And besides, we're going to teach you everything you need to know. Well, that should have been my first clue. This wasn't going to go well. I get into this situation and it wasn't going well. A few months later, I am just a hot mess. I was anxious, sleepless nights, stomach aches. I was overeating. Oh, it wasn't good. So I went to therapy. I thought I am going to learn how to handle this situation because I love my job. I was the director of an adolescent and adult substance abuse treatment program. I loved the work that we were doing, and I wanted to grow myself as a leader. I go and talk with the therapist, and after I tell her why I was there, she asked me some questions about my family upbringing, and then she said, sounds like your family is in your office. Little did I know that how those words would be a guide for my career. And as a result of the work I did with her, both individually and in group, I recognized my role in my family had been the caretaker, to be the one to rescue, to smooth things over when there was tension, to bring harmony. And when I went to the group therapy session that she offered, to the first session, I was introducing myself. And as I was telling people why I was there and my work situation, I began to show emotion. And she stopped me and she said, it's okay to cry here. The Kleenex are over by the door. And initially I thought, I didn't ask anybody to give me a Kleenex, and maybe it's really not okay to cry here. She must have seen the look on my face as I didn't say that. And then she said, I will never do something for you that you're capable of doing for yourself, including get your own Kleenex.
Wow.
And those words were transformative to me of learning how to overcome being that caretaker, being the one to rescue and prevent other people from experiencing consequences. And then I would be resentful for being the fixer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for those who are listening, if you resonate with being a leader or being that person in the workplace that picks up the pieces for your coworkers, or is the one who's always staying late, and you're beginning to be resentful, the metaphor of get your own Kleenex is a metaphor for setting boundaries and letting people be responsible for their own choices, including getting their own Kleenex.
I love it. I love it. Now that ties beautifully to you're offering our listeners a free resource, and it's called 7 Reminders to Empower Your Employees to Get Their Own Kleenex. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it's intended as a checklist for you to read before you maybe go into a meeting or are about to have a difficult conversation, if you tend to be that person who gets pulled into fixing other people's problems or metaphorically getting their Kleenex, it's a reminder to set boundaries. And it's a reminder that when we do things for people that they're capable of doing for themselves, we're preventing them from reaching their full potential. And allowing people to get their own Kleenex is also a way to release resentment so that we don't hold that inside. And that affects resentment and angst, anxiety only contributes to us not showing up to be who we aspire to be. So it's also part of taking responsibility for our side of the conflict and letting people be responsible for their own lives.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful resource. I'm so happy to have had you here today, sharing your message, sharing your research and those insights. And I just want to thank you for being such a light in this industry and sharing your zone of genius with everybody.
Thank you, Tammy. It's truly been an honor to be here with you today. Thank you.
And that's an official wrap on this session of the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit Speaker Series. Now be sure to connect with your favorite speakers by clicking on the link below and taking advantage of the free resources that they are sharing with you so that you can dissolve your conflict without damaging your relationships. Now be sure to head on over into the Facebook group Dissolving Workplace Conflict and give us your favorite takeaways from today's session using the hashtag Dissolve Workplace Conflict. I can't wait to see what you've learned.